The wind howled through the narrow mountain pass like a living thing, carrying ice and snow in jagged gusts that stung the skin. Amelia Harper wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, her fingers numb and clumsy as she struggled to keep her balance on the slippery path. She had been sent to gather medicinal herbs from the upper slopes, a simple enough task in fair weather, but winter had arrived early, leaving the world around her white and unforgiving. The sun had long vanished behind a veil of gray clouds, and the shadows of the cliffs loomed like dark sentinels over the frozen landscape. Every step was a battle against the cold and the treacherous ground, yet she pressed forward, determined to reach the herbs that could save her village's sick children. Then, something unusual caught her eye, a dark, unmoving figure half buried in the snow. At first, she thought it might be a fallen hunter or perhaps a stranded traveler, but as she drew closer, her breath caught in her chest. A man lay sprawled on the icy ground, his body rigid and coated in frost. His features were sharp and striking even beneath the layers of ice that clung to him, his long dark hair matted and frozen to his face. Amelia's heart raced. She had heard tales of men lost to the mountains in winter, their bodies never found until spring thaw. But never had she imagined standing face to face with one, without hesitation. She knelt beside him, pressing her hands against his frozen limbs, trying to generate warmth. "Stay with me," she whispered urgently, her voice trembling. "You're not going to die, not if I can help it." She tore strips from her shawl, wrapping them around his wrists and ankles, and pressed a flask of heated broth to his lips, coaxing him to swallow. It was a delicate and terrifying process. One wrong move and she feared she might do more harm than good. But Amelia's hands moved instinctively, guided by determination and compassion. Hours passed, or perhaps it was only moments, time lost in the blur of relentless wind and her tireless effort. Slowly, faint signs of life returned. His fingers twitched, a shallow breath shivered through his chest, and then his eyes, dark, fierce, and stormy, fluttered open. He tried to speak, but the words were incomprehensible. His lips cracked and blew. Amelia smiled through tears and urged him gently, repeating syllables and encouraging him to drink more broth. Even as he regained consciousness, Amelia felt a flicker of unease. There was a quiet strength in him that went beyond physical prowess, a stillness, a focus that suggested he was not an ordinary man. She could not have known, standing there in the freezing wind, that this stranger was the Apache lord of these lands, a man whose authority and presence commanded loyalty from all who lived in the valleys below. Nor could she have guessed that her act of mercy, simple, instinctive, human, would ripple into a life-altering fate, binding her to him in ways she could never imagine. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he managed to sit up, shivering but alive. His eyes met hers, and for a brief, startling moment, the world seemed to hush around them. There was a recognition there, not of her, but of her courage, her heart, the unspoken understanding that she had risked everything to save him. He did not speak immediately. Words were unnecessary. The gratitude, the curiosity, the acknowledgement of her bravery, all of it lingered in the space between them. Amelia shivered and looked away, trying to mask the flutter of fear and anticipation that had settled in her chest. She had saved a life, yes, but she could not yet know the storm that her choice had set in motion. The frozen Apache she had rescued was no ordinary man, and the moment he stood, eyes steady and calculating, the first threads of a bond, complicated, dangerous, and inexorably powerful, began to weave themselves around them both. And so, amid the biting wind and the relentless snow, an extraordinary story began, the story of a woman who dared to save a stranger, unaware that she had awakened the lord of the land, and that his claim on her heart and her life was only beginning. The first rays of dawn struggled to pierce the heavy clouds, casting a pale, gray light over the snow-blanketed mountains. Amelia had managed to get the Apache warrior to a small, sheltered cave, its mouth partially hidden by rock and snowdrifts. She had built a fire from damp wood she'd scavenged, and though it sputtered and smoked, it provided enough warmth to begin thawing his frozen body. He lay on a blanket she had fashioned from her own coat and a few scraps of cloth. Still shivering violently, but alive, he did not speak immediately. Instead, he watched her, and Amelia, despite herself, felt the weight of his gaze. There was something commanding in the way he studied her movements, not with suspicion, but with quiet, measured attention, as though he were weighing her very character. She had always believed that courage was enough to define a person, but in his presence, she realized there were degrees of strength she had never encountered. Finally, he spoke, and though his words were broken at first, she gradually understood him. His voice was low and resonant, carrying authority even in its weakness. "You saved me," he said, the words hesitant. "Why?" Amelia hesitated. How could she explain that she had acted purely on instinct, that her heart had not known of his lineage or power, that she had simply seen a man in danger and refused to let him die? She shook her head slightly. "Because I couldn't let you die," she admitted softly. "I wouldn't. I couldn't." His eyes softened, just a fraction, but there was still an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Few would risk." "For me," he muttered, shivering and coughing. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with a renewed focus. "You are brave," he said, the syllables deliberate. "Few act without fear." Amelia blushed at the faint praise. She busied herself adding more wood to the fire, trying to hide her fluster. "You were nearly frozen. I couldn't leave you like that." He studied her again, his gaze lingering on her hands, red and raw from the cold and her exertion. "You care. Not only for self," he said slowly, "but for others." His English was imperfect, his accent thick. Yet each word carried a weight that made her stomach flutter in ways she could not name. There was a silence between them, filled with the crackle of the fire and the whistle of wind outside the cave. Then, unexpectedly, he shifted, sitting up with effort, leaning on one arm. His posture was upright, regal even in his weakened state. Amelia had already noticed the way his presence seemed to command attention, even in this private, desolate place, but now it became undeniable. There was an authority in him, a subtle power that seemed to radiate without conscious effort. "You must know," he said carefully, choosing each word. "Am not like other men. I lead my people. My land," he trailed off, testing her reaction. Amelia frowned, unsure how to respond. "Lead? What do you mean?" she asked cautiously. He paused, as though weighing how much to reveal. "The land. The people I am responsible. I protect.
All under my name."
Even in broken English, there was no mistaking the seriousness in his tone. Her heart skipped. She had saved a man, yes, but now she realized she had saved a man of immense importance. A man whose life and legacy carried the weight of an entire community. Amelia felt a mix of awe and fear. This was no ordinary stranger, no simple victim of circumstance. She had unwittingly stepped into a world of power, tradition, an obligation one far beyond her humble life in the village. And yet, despite the danger, a strange thrill coursed through her veins. She had saved him once, but now, the fire that warmed them both seemed to ignite something new, curiosity, tension, and an undeniable connection neither of them could ignore Dot as the morning sun struggled to break through the clouds. Amelia realized that this rescue was only the beginning. The frozen Apache she had saved was no mere wanderer. He was a lord, a protector of his people, And somehow, though she did not yet understand how he had begun to claim a place in her life, and perhaps in her heart, outside the wind continued to howl. Inside the cave, two lives had collided, and the world they knew was about to change forever. Amelia woke to the sound of birds, distant and muffled by the snow-laden forest surrounding the cave. The fire had burned low overnight, leaving embers that glowed faintly in the morning chill. The Apache warrior was awake before her, sitting on the blanket she had arranged, his dark eyes fixed on the small fire with a steady intensity. He had not spoken yet, but the weight of his presence filled the cave. Amelia couldn't help but notice the subtle way he carried himself, even weakened. There was a rhythm, a command in his posture that suggested he was accustomed to authority. As she brewed a simple tea over the embers, he shifted his gaze to her. "You stay?" he asked, his English still halting, but clearer than yesterday. There was no question in his tone. It was an expectation. Amelia blinked, taken aback. I need to gather supplies," she replied carefully, not wanting to offend him, but unsure how much he understood of her world. He tilted his head, the dark strands of hair falling over his eyes. "No, leave," he said softly, almost a question this time. "Danger. Outside. For you." A shiver ran down her spine, not from the cold, but from the intensity of his words. She realized in that moment that the man she had saved was not only strong and commanding, but fiercely protective. "I thank you," she murmured, unsure whether she was thanking him for his concern or warning. The truth was, both applied. As the hours passed, he began to move more easily, testing his strength. Amelia observed quietly, fascinated. He was graceful despite his recovery, every movement deliberate and precise. She asked cautiously about his land, curious to understand the glimpses of authority he had hinted at. "My people," he began slowly, his voice measured, "live. Valleys, forests. All mine to protect. My responsibility." His gaze fell on hers, steady and unyielding. "Few understand what it is to lead. Protect." Amelia nodded slowly. The enormity of his words sank in. She had rescued a man whose life was intertwined with an entire community, a protector whose decisions shaped the lives of countless people. For a moment, she felt the weight of her own actions, not just the rescue, but her choice to stay, to care for him, to step into his world without knowing its rules. Curiosity mingled with unease. "Your people, they follow you?" she asked softly, trying to keep her voice steady. He looked away briefly, then back at her. "Yes, respect. Loyalty, tradition," he said. "They know me. They trust me. They wait for me." There was pride in his tone, but also an undercurrent of solitude. Amelia realized that, despite the strength he exuded, he carried a burden few could understand, a life lived in constant responsibility, where personal desires were often sacrificed for duty. Her hands trembled slightly as she prepared more tea. "It must be lonely," she said gently, not knowing if he would answer. A faint smile touched his lips, brief and almost imperceptible. "Sometimes, but necessary," he admitted. Then his gaze sharpened. "You, brave. For stay. Many run. Fear. Danger." Amelia felt her chest tighten. The admiration in his words, the recognition of her courage, sent a flutter through her she could not ignore. And yet, beneath that, there was something more, a subtle tension, a magnetic pull that neither of them had spoken aloud, but which lingered in every glance. Every careful word. By midday, snow had eased into a quiet fall, and Amelia realized it was time to consider returning to her village. She packed her modest supplies, feeling a tug of reluctance. The man she had saved, this warrior, this lord, had become more than a patient in her care. He was a presence that demanded attention, respect, and, inexplicably, her curiosity died as she turned to leave. He placed a hand on her arm. Strong, warm, and firm. "Wait," he said simply. No question, no hesitation, just a command tempered by care. Amelia looked into his dark eyes, and in that instant, she understood something essential. The Apache she had saved was no ordinary man. He was powerful, protective, and he would claim her, whether she understood the implications yet or not, outside. The wind had softened, but a storm of another kind had begun, a storm of attraction, of destiny, and of the uncharted life that lay ahead. Woven tightly with the fate of the frozen Apache she had saved, Amelia returned to the village, with a mind buzzing like the wind through the mountains. Her hands were red and raw from the cold, her supplies meager, yet her thoughts were consumed by the man she had saved. She replayed every moment in the cave, the way he had studied her so intently, the quiet authority in his posture, the intensity in his gaze that seemed to measure not just her courage, but her very essence. There was something about him, something both terrifying and magnetic, that she could not shake. Days passed, and Amelia found herself restless. She tried to focus on her daily tasks, tending to her small garden, preparing meals, visiting the sick, and delivering herbs. Yet each time she closed her eyes, she saw him sitting by the fire, his dark eyes fixed on her, his hand resting near her shoulder in that commanding yet protective gesture. It was not fear he inspired, nor even simple admiration, but a stirring she could not name, a pull that both excited and unsettled her. Her curiosity finally overpowered caution. Against better judgment, she decided to return to the mountains to check on him. She brought supplies, food, and a few items from the village she hoped might help him recover fully. The wind had calmed, leaving the snow quiet underfoot, and the sunlight glinted on the frozen ridges, painting the world in sharp white and silver. When she reached the cave, she found him already standing outside, surveying the distant slopes. Even with the remnants of snow clinging to his cloak, he exuded power, confidence, and a presence that seemed to make the mountains themselves bend to his authority. Amelia swallowed hard. She had expected weakness, vulnerability, but this was something entirely different. This was a man who commanded even without speaking. "Return," he said, his voice low, calm, and carrying an unspoken expectation. "Good." Amelia felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "I brought supplies," she said softly, holding out the bag. His gaze followed her movements, deliberate, weighing each action as though he were judging not just her courage, but her worth. He stepped closer, the snow crunching beneath his boots. "You care for me," he said simply. There was no accusation, no flourish, just a statement of fact. Amelia's heart skipped. How could he know? She had tried to hide her worry, her sleepless nights, the worry that had gnawed at her since she left the cave. "I did what anyone would," she said quietly, trying to maintain composure. He shook his head, almost imperceptibly. "No, not anyone. Few, brave. Act for another." His gaze softened just slightly, and for a fleeting moment, Amelia glimpsed a depth of emotion that he rarely revealed, vulnerability beneath the unyielding exterior of the lord of the land. As the day wore on, he guided her through the surrounding forest, showing her hidden streams and valleys, and pointing out markers of the land he governed. His people were not present, yet it was clear he was connected to them, responsible for every trail, every grove, every ridge. Amelia felt both awe and intimidation. This was no ordinary man. He held life and loyalty in his hands, and she was now a part of this intricate web of duty. By evening, they returned to the cave where the fire awaited. Silence fell, comfortable yet charged. Amelia noticed the subtle ways he moved to protect the warmth of the fire, the way he occasionally glanced at her as though confirming she was safe. Then, suddenly, he leaned slightly closer, his voice low and deliberate. "You stay with me?" Amelia froze, the words striking her like the wind off the mountains. Stay? In his world, under his watch, with the weight of his authority pressing down like the cliffs around them? Yet the thought was not terrifying. It was compelling. Her heart, stubborn and curious, stirred. She realized, with a mix of fear and excitement, that she was being offered more than protection. She was being invited into a life intertwined with his, bound by danger, duty, and desire. Outside, the snow drifted quietly, masking the treacherous paths that led back to her village. Inside, a fire burned, illuminating the beginnings of a connection that would shape both their fates. Amelia understood one thing clearly. She had saved him once, but now, in the quiet majesty of the mountains and the intensity of his gaze, she sensed that the Lord of the land had begun to claim more than her presence. He had begun to claim her heart. The peace of the mountains was deceptive. The quiet that had blanketed the slopes like a soft veil was only the calm before the storm. Amelia had settled into the cave, her heart a mix of anticipation and unease. She had begun to understand the depth of the Apache's authority, the way the land responded to him, even in his absence of people, and the unspoken respect that clung to him like a second skin. Yet she had not yet glimpsed the danger that lurked beyond the quiet hills, nor the way it would test her courage and his claim over her. The first warning came in the form of tracks. Deep, wide, and unmistakably recent, they cut through the snow toward the cave. Amelia spotted them while gathering firewood and froze. The footprints were too large to belong to a lone hunter, too purposeful to be accidental. Panic flared in her chest, but before she could act, the Apache appeared beside her, silent as a shadow, eyes scanning the path ahead. "They? Come," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Danger, near." Amelia's stomach tightened. "Who are they?" "Outsiders, greedy. Want land, want power." He did not elaborate. His words carried the weight of certainty. Amelia sensed that he had faced such threats before, that his life had been shaped by vigilance and constant responsibility. And now she was thrust into this peril as well, an unintentional accomplice, simply by being near him. The sound of hooves echoed faintly in the distance. Amelia's first instinct was to flee, but he placed a hand on her arm, firm, unyielding, yet protective. "No, run," he said. "Stay. With me. Safe. If you trust." Amelia hesitated, then nodded, understanding that leaving would not only endanger her, but also signal weakness to the men approaching. Her fear mingled with something unexpected, a thrill of trust, an acknowledgement that her life was now intertwined with his dot as the riders appeared through the trees. The Apache moved like a shadow, positioning himself between Amelia and the threat. His presence radiated authority, and for a moment the intruders faltered, their confidence wavering. Amelia watched in awe as he assessed the situation, his every movement precise and deliberate. This was no ordinary man. This was a protector, a leader, a force that demanded respect. "You leave," he commanded, voice low but carrying across the clearing. The intruders exchanged wary glances, then hesitated. He advanced a step, and the snow seemed to respond to his authority, crunching under his weight with a rhythm that announced command. Amelia felt her breath catch. The power he wielded was both terrifying and intoxicating. After tense moments that felt like hours, the outsiders retreated, muttering curses under their breath. The Apache watched them disappear into the forest before turning to Amelia. His eyes softened, but his intensity remained. Danger, not gone, he warned. But you, brave, you, stay near me. Amelia's heart pounded, not just from fear, but from the proximity of his gaze, the unspoken acknowledgment of her courage. She realized then that his claim over her was no longer subtle or tentative. It was bold, protective, and undeniable. In saving him, in staying by his side, she had awakened a bond that could not be ignored. That night, by the fire, they spoke little, yet the connection between them was palpable. Amelia noticed how he moved to place himself between her and the fire, between her and the darkened mouth of the cave. Each gesture, careful and deliberate, reinforced the truth she had been avoiding. He was staking more than just protection. He was staking her presence, her trust, her heart. She felt a strange exhilaration in that knowledge, a combination of fear, admiration, and something tender and dangerous that made her pulse quicken. The man she had rescued, once frozen, fragile, dependent, was now fully restored, fully commanding, fully aware of the hold he had over her, and perhaps over himself as well. Outside, the wind whispered through the mountain pass, carrying a warning of more challenges to come. Inside, two lives were entwined by courage, danger, and desire. Amelia knew that the path ahead would be treacherous, yet she also understood that she would not step away. She could not, for in saving him, she had discovered a destiny she had never imagined, and a man who would claim her in every sense that mattered. The morning sunlight broke through the clouds in shards of gold, glinting on the snow-covered peaks and illuminating the rugged landscape. Amelia awoke to the gentle warmth of the fire and the steady presence of the Apache warrior beside her. He was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the blanket, eyes scanning the horizon with a focus that made her heart skip a beat. The man she had saved was no longer just a survivor. He was a leader, a sentinel of the land, and she was beginning to understand the gravity of being near him. As she stirred, he finally spoke, his voice calm but carrying the authority of command. "You, strong," he said simply, yet the weight behind the words made Amelia feel both seen and uncomfortably exposed. She had been strong before, had braved the snowstorm and saved him from certain death. But this acknowledgment from him felt different, personal, intimate, and deliberate. "I had to," she replied softly, trying to mask the flutter of nerves in her chest. "I couldn't leave you there. It wasn't optional." His dark eyes held hers for a long moment, assessing, weighing, as though measuring not just her courage, but her essence. Then, unexpectedly, he leaned slightly closer. "You? Different," he murmured. "Not like others. Brave, heart, sharp." Each word was deliberate, his accent thick but his meaning unmistakable. Amelia felt heat rise to her cheeks, realizing that this was more than admiration. There was a claim in his gaze, a recognition of her worth that was both thrilling and intimidating. The morning passed in quiet companionship. He moved through the clearing with fluid, precise steps, pointing out hidden valleys, secret water sources, and paths known only to those who lived intimately with the land. Amelia followed closely, observing his every motion, noticing how the animals, the trees, even the wind seemed to respond to his presence. It was mesmerizing, almost magical, and she understood why his people revered him. She was witnessing not just authority, but the embodiment of stewardship, responsibility, and power. When they returned to the cave, she began preparing a simple meal over the fire, her hands moving almost mechanically as she processed the storm of emotions swirling within her. The warrior watched silently, occasionally offering guidance or pointing out safer ways to handle the firewood, but mostly he simply observed. Amelia felt the tension between them like a tangible thread, pulling tighter with every glance, every brush of their hands, every shared silence. Finally, He spoke again, voice low and deliberate. You? Stay? The question was almost a command, not an inquiry. His eyes searched hers, unwavering, full of intent. Amelia's heart raced. To stay meant stepping fully into his world, a world of duty, of loyalty, of danger. It meant acknowledging that the bond between them was no longer tentative, that it carried the weight of unspoken claims, of protective instincts, and perhaps even desire. She hesitated, then nodded. Yes, she whispered. I'll stay. A faint smile touched his lips, fleeting but genuine, and for the first time, Amelia saw the human beneath the warrior, the man beneath the legend. He moved closer, resting a hand near hers on the blanket, careful yet possessive. She felt a shiver not from the cold, but from the electricity of proximity, the unspoken acknowledgement that their lives were now intertwined in ways neither of them could ignore. As the day wore on, they spoke of lighter things, the paths through the mountains, the hidden groves, the patterns of snow and wind that only someone attuned to the land could read. Yet beneath every word lay an unspoken understanding, a growing intimacy, a recognition of courage and loyalty, a claim that extended beyond mere protection. Night fell, and with it came the quiet hush of the snow-laden forest. Amelia sat close to the fire, her thoughts restless. She realized that she no longer viewed the Apache warrior as just a man she had saved. He had become a force in her life, powerful, protective, and undeniably magnetic. She understood that staying was no longer a matter of choice, it was a matter of destiny, of courage, and of the beginning of a bond that would shape both their lives forever. Outside, the wind whispered through the peaks, a gentle echo of the storms to come. Inside, two lives had collided and merged, bound by bravery, trust, and the first sparks of something far more potent than either had anticipated. The sun was beginning its descent behind the jagged peaks, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. Amelia moved quietly around the cave, stacking firewood and preparing a modest meal, but the sense of unease she had felt for days had not left her. She sensed it before she even saw it, the faint disturbance in the snow, the broken branches, the irregular footprints that marred the otherwise pristine white landscape. Something or someone was approaching. The Apache warrior, already alert, stood at the mouth of the cave, his eyes narrowing. "They come," he said, the words almost a growl. "Outsiders, greedy, dangerous." His voice carried the weight of authority, the calmness of a man used to protecting not just himself, but the land and its people. Amelia's pulse quickened, a mix of fear and the strange thrill that came whenever she was near him. Before she could react, a group of riders appeared in the distance, their shapes blurred by the falling snow. Their hooves broke the quiet rhythm of the mountains, sending vibrations through the earth that Amelia could feel in her bones. The Apache stepped forward, placing himself between the cave and the approaching threat. Every motion he made was deliberate, measured, yet radiated an unshakable command. The riders hesitated, sensing the authority that emanated from him. Amelia's instinct was to flee, but his hand on her arm stopped her. Firm, protective, yet gentle, it anchored her. "No." "Run," he said, his dark eyes locking with hers. "Stay? Near me. Safe. If you trust." Her fear mingled with a strange exhilaration. She realized that staying was not just an act of courage, it was a declaration of trust, a silent acknowledgement of his claim over her. She nodded, her heart racing. "I trust you," she whispered, the words trembling but sincere. The riders drew closer, but the Apache moved with a fluid, commanding grace, positioning himself strategically. His gaze swept over the snow, calculating distances and angles, anticipating their moves. Amelia watched in awe, understanding for the first time what it meant to be near a man who was not only a warrior, but a leader whose authority extended far beyond himself. "You leave," he commanded, voice low but carrying across the clearing. The intruders faltered, uncertainty flashing in their eyes. One of them shouted, but the sound seemed to vanish against the weight of his presence. He stepped forward, and the snow under his boots crunched with a rhythm that announced dominion, a subtle, almost mystical declaration that the land and she were under his protection. Finally, after tense moments that stretched like hours, the riders retreated, cursing and muttering under their breath. The warrior's gaze lingered on the path they had taken, ensuring they would not return soon. Then he turned to Amelia, dark eyes softening just slightly, though the intensity remained. "Danger, not gone," he warned. "But you, brave, you stay." "Near me." Amelia's chest swelled with a mixture of relief and awe. She realized in that moment that his claim over her was no longer subtle, it was absolute, protective, and undeniable. Every glance, every careful placement of his body, every word he spoke carried an unspoken promise. He would guard her, and in doing so, stake a claim over her presence, her trust, and perhaps even her heart. That evening, as the wind howled gently outside and the fire crackled in the cave, they sat close together. Words were few, but the connection was tangible, charged with unspoken tension. Amelia noticed how he subtly positioned himself between her and the shadows, how his gaze lingered, calculating and protective. And she understood that this was more than mere survival. They were bound. In courage, in danger, and in the unacknowledged pull of desire. Outside, the mountains whispered of storms yet to come. Inside, two lives were converging, caught between peril and longing, trust and claim. Amelia knew that the path ahead would test every ounce of bravery she possessed. But she also knew, with an undeniable certainty, that she would not step away. Not now, not ever, for she had been claimed by the man she had saved, by the Lord of the land, and by a destiny that neither fear nor reason could undo. The morning air was crisp and biting, carrying the scent of pine and snow as Amelia followed the Apache warrior through a narrow mountain pass. His strides were long and effortless, every movement controlled and deliberate, and she struggled to match his pace. Each step she took reminded her how deeply she had become entwined in his world, a world of vigilance, responsibility, and unspoken rules she was only beginning to understand. He glanced back at her briefly, dark eyes assessing, reading her fatigue and determination with uncanny precision. "Slow, no matter," he said, his voice low but carrying authority. "Strong, stay." The words were simple, yet Amelia felt the weight behind them. There was no questioning his judgment, no hint of doubt. He expected her to endure, to rise to the challenge, and in that expectation, she felt the first real stirrings of belonging. They reached a ridge that overlooked a valley blanketed in snow. Below, smoke curled from small clusters of dwellings, and Amelia realized she was seeing the people he protected. The sight filled her with awe and apprehension. These were not strangers. They were lives entrusted to his care, bound by loyalty and respect. The realization made her chest tighten. To be near him was to step into a responsibility far greater than herself. "You see," he said, his tone almost gentle, though authority still laced every word. "Land, people, mine to guard, life, not simple." Amelia nodded, unsure of what to say. Words felt inadequate to express the mixture of admiration and fear that churned inside her. "It's incredible," she whispered. "I never imagined someone could carry such responsibility." He studied her carefully, and for a moment, the intensity in his gaze softened, replaced by something almost tender. "You, brave, heart, stay." His hand brushed against hers, not by accident, but with deliberate, possessive care. Amelia felt a shiver ripple through her. This was no ordinary connection. It was a claim, unspoken yet undeniable, a declaration of attachment and authority that neither of them could ignore as the day progressed. They moved through the valley, and Amelia began to witness the first real glimpses of his leadership. Villagers bowed respectfully as he passed, offering nods and greetings that carried both reverence and trust. He responded with measured gestures, calm words, and occasional directions, each action revealing the balance of power and compassion he wielded effortlessly. Amelia realized that her presence here was both extraordinary and perilous. She was walking alongside a man whose life was defined by vigilance, whose every decision impacted hundreds. Yet, amid the duty and authority, there were moments of intimacy. A shared glance at the edge of the ridge, a hand brushing lightly against hers as they navigated the snow, a quiet word of caution, each gesture deepened the tension between them. Amelia found herself drawn to him, not just for the strength he displayed, but for the subtle warmth, the quiet acknowledgement that she mattered to him in ways beyond simple gratitude. As evening fell and the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the valley in gold and crimson, they returned to their cave. The fire blazed brightly, casting long shadows across the walls. Amelia sat close, aware of the closeness, the space charged with unspoken meaning. He observed her, protective and possessive, and she understood fully what his claim entailed: not just guardianship, but a claim on her presence, her courage, and increasingly, her heart. The quiet between them was comfortable, yet electric. Amelia felt the pull of something deeper, something neither fear nor reason could resist. She realized that staying with him meant stepping fully into his world, embracing the danger, the responsibility, and the intensity of the connection that had grown between them. Outside, the snow continued to fall softly, blanketing the mountains in white, masking the peril that might come. Inside, two lives were bound more tightly than ever by courage, trust, and the undeniable claim of the Apache Lord. Amelia knew, with a clarity that left her both exhilarated and apprehensive, that she had crossed a threshold she could never return from. She was no longer just a rescuer. She was claimed, tethered by danger, devotion, and desire, and the story of her life had become inseparable from the man she had saved and who had, in turn, claimed her heart. The wind had shifted overnight, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke and a tension Amelia could feel in her bones. She had grown accustomed to the quiet majesty of the mountains, the protective presence of the Apache warrior, and the rhythm of their shared days, but today was different. Something was approaching, something purposeful, something that carried danger. She was gathering water from a nearby stream when she first saw them riders in the distance, moving swiftly through the snow. Her heart froze, and instinctively she began to retreat. But before she could move far, a shadow fell over her. The Apache warrior was there, standing tall and unyielding between her and the threat. His eyes, dark and commanding, scanned the approaching figures. "They." "Come," he said simply, each syllable deliberate, carrying the weight of certainty. "Outsiders, greedy. Want land, want." "You." Amelia's breath caught. The danger was real, closer than she had anticipated, and the realization that she was entwined in his world and its perils sent a shiver down her spine. What do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling despite the courage she had summoned in the past weeks. He placed a firm hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "Stay close. Trust me." There was no question in his tone, no hesitation. In that instant, Amelia felt both fear and an undeniable reassurance. The man she had rescued, nurtured back to life, and come to care for was not just her protector. He was the force that made her feel safe in the face of overwhelming danger. The riders drew nearer, their figures growing larger against the stark white of the mountains. The Apache warrior moved with fluid precision, positioning himself strategically, his eyes assessing every detail of the terrain and the intruder's movements. Amelia watched, awestruck, as he transformed before her eyes from the man she had saved to the lord of the land, commanding presence radiating authority, power, and a silent promise of protection. "You? Leave," he said, his voice low, carrying across the clearing. The riders faltered, uncertainty flashing in their eyes as if sensing the authority that radiated from him. One shouted, but the words seemed to falter against the invisible weight of his presence. Amelia felt a thrill, a dangerous excitement. That this man, the one who had once been fragile and frozen in the snow, now wielded power that could bend fear itself. After tense moments that stretched painfully, the intruders finally retreated, disappearing into the forest beyond. The warrior's gaze followed them until the threat was gone, then turned to Amelia. There was a softness now, a subtle shift from authority to concern. "Danger, not gone," he warned gently. "But you, brave, you, stay. Near me." Amelia's chest swelled with a mixture of relief and awe. She realized that his claim over her was now unmistakable, undeniable. Every glance, every protective gesture, every word carried weight. He had staked her presence. Her courage, and increasingly, her heart died as night fell. The cave seemed to glow with the warmth of the fire, and the tension of the day melted into quiet intimacy. She noticed how he positioned himself subtly between her and the shadows, how his gaze lingered just enough to make her pulse quicken. His hand brushed against hers as he passed her a cup of tea, deliberate and protective, reinforcing the unspoken claim he had over her. Amelia understood. Now that staying with him meant more than survival, it meant entering a world of danger, authority, and desire that she could not escape. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once, and she felt a thrilling certainty. She would never step away. Not now, not ever. Outside, the mountains whispered with the promise of storms yet to come. Inside, two lives were bound ever tighter by courage, trust, danger, and the undeniable pull of desire. Amelia had crossed a threshold she could never return from, and the man she had saved, the lord of the land, had claimed more than her protection. He had claimed her heart, her courage, and the very essence of her being. The morning was crisp and sharp, the sunlight glinting off the snow like scattered diamonds. Amelia stirred from a restless sleep, her heart still echoing the events of the previous days, the dangers faced, the lessons learned, and the unspoken bond that had grown between her and the Apache warrior. She rose quietly, careful not to disturb him. But when she glanced toward the fire, she saw him already awake, standing at the cave's entrance, eyes sweeping the horizon with that commanding intensity that had first drawn her awe and admiration. "You." "Awake," he said softly, his voice carrying authority even in calm tones. Amelia felt her pulse quicken at the sound. It was no longer just a greeting, it was a recognition, a claim, a presence that demanded acknowledgement. "I am," she whispered, stepping closer. "And I will stay with you." The words were firm, deliberate, and carried more weight than she had intended. They were a promise, a declaration, and an acceptance of the life that had begun to unfold around them. He studied her for a long moment, eyes dark and unwavering, and then a faint, almost imperceptible smile softened his features. "Good," he said simply. No further explanation was needed. In that moment, Amelia realized she had crossed the final threshold. There was no turning back, no retreat, only the path forward with him, intertwined in ways both protective and profound. their attention was soon drawn to movement beyond the ridge. A small group of villagers appeared, their faces a mix of relief and reverence. The Apache warrior gestured subtly, and Amelia saw how naturally they responded, how deeply his authority and care were respected. The moment crystallized for her the true weight of the man she had saved. He was not only a protector but a leader, a guardian whose decisions shaped the lives of those around him. One of the villagers approached cautiously, bowing their head. "You? Safe?" Amelia asked, her concern more for him than herself. "They are safe," he replied, voice steady. Then he turned his gaze back to her, dark eyes locking with hers in a moment charged with meaning. "And you?" "Safe, because—" "Brave, because—" "Stayed." His words were fragmented, but the intent was clear. He claimed her not just by proximity or protection, but by acknowledgement of her courage, her presence, and her heart. Amelia felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of pride, relief, and something deeper, something that had grown steadily and irresistibly since the moment she had found him frozen in the snow. She stepped closer, her hands brushing his, the contact electric and grounding at once. "You belong," he murmured, his voice low and deliberate. "Here, with me. In this land, in my life." Tears pricked at the corners of Amelia's eyes. She had never imagined such a claim, such intensity, or such connection. And yet, in his unwavering gaze, in the protective curve of his hand, in the undeniable strength that radiated from every movement, she understood fully. She did belong here in his world, by his side, and within the bond they had forged through courage, danger, and unspoken trust. For the first time since the snowstorm, Amelia felt entirely at peace. The mountains no longer seemed daunting. The wind no longer carried only cold and isolation. They carried promise and strength and the future they would face together. She allowed herself to lean closer, feeling the heat of his presence, the firm weight of his hand enveloping hers. "Together," she whispered. "Together," he repeated, a statement and a vow, sealing the bond that had begun the moment she had reached into the snow and refused to leave him behind. Outside, the sun climbed higher, illuminating the valley and the village below. A world now touched by the courage of one woman and the claim of a powerful, protective man. Inside the cave, a fire burned steadily, echoing the warmth of a connection forged in adversity. Strengthened in peril and destined to endure, Amelia knew, as she rested beside him, that she had not only saved a man but had been saved herself from fear, from isolation, and from a life of quiet uncertainty. And the Apache warrior, lord of the land and guardian of her heart, had claimed her fully, not with force, but with protection, respect, and an unwavering acknowledgement of the bond that had grown between them, a bond that would endure, unbroken, as they faced the mountains, the snow, and the world together.